Welcome to the CSS project. During this session, we will be creating a beautiful carousel like this with this nice effect and some navigation buttons at the bottom. Also, this project is fully responsive and mobile and tablet ready as well. During this project, we only use CSS and HTML, and we won't be using any type of JavaScript for this project. During the course, I will describe all of these codes line by line for you, so at the end of the project, you will be able to create one of these carousels for yourself and customize it. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. For this project, I created a directory and called it CSS Carousel and opened it with Visual Studio Code. Now I want to create two files. One of them is a index.html file. That is the HTML template, and the other one will be master.css, since I want to keep the style separated and import it in my index.html later on. So I just type some simple style here. HTML and body will have margin 0 and a black background. So we can test it first. Now I save it and go to index.html, and I want to create a blank HTML template, so I type exclamation mark and press tab on the keyboard, so VS Code creates a blank HTML template for me. Let's give it a title and then import the CSS. To import an external CSS, we use the link tag, and inside the href, we need to give it the address to the CSS file, just like that. I don't have any directory or upper directory. The CSS file is just next to index.html, so it will be enough to just mention the name. And now the CSS is imported. Now if I open the file with live server, I see the style that I wrote here. Live server is a VS Code extension that I've already installed on my VS Code. If you want to install this extension, you can go to extension tab and live server, search live server from here and install it. I've already installed it, and now as you see, I can see my changes in real time. Now let's go to the next step. First of all, let's create a wrapper for the component. This is not a part of the component, but we just want to create a wrapper to put the component inside it. So the container will be the class name, and first of all, I want to style it a little bit. So I copy and paste it here with a period before the name, and let's give it some style. For example, width 1200 pixels, max width 100%, also 20 pixels padding, and let's give it a border as well, just to see. It's not necessary, I just want it to be visible. And also, since we've given it padding and border, we want to include those width in the width section and the width of the object, so we need to add box sizing order box. Also, I'd like to give it a height, so it will cover the whole height of the window. So I give it a height 100 VH, view height. When I save it, we will see this. If you're seeing this border, dashed border around, this is the container that we have. Also, let's give it a position and set it to relative, because later on we want to give position absolute to the component, and we adjust it inside the page. So we need to give the parent, the container that actually is the parent tag, a position relative. And this is the container. Now let's create our component. The first class we want to create is component, and inside it, carousel will be another class. We use class so we can use multiple carousels inside a single HTML file. So let's first style these two. I copy this and go to CSS, and here paste it with a period at the beginning. And now I want the parent to be position absolute, and I want to center it and also put it at the middle of the page, both vertically and horizontally. So I give it a top 50%, so it will have 50% distance from top and also left 50%. But since the width and height of the component itself will be added to this 50%, I want to adjust it, so I make sure that it will stay at the center of the page. To do that, I use transform and give it a translate x minus 50% and also translate y minus 50%. And for now, to see it, I just give it a border, 2 pixels, solid, something like lighter gray, and let's save it. And we already have it here. Let's put some content here. And as you see, it's over here. And this is the way we can center a div. The next step is creating some radio buttons. And the idea of creating this carousel is adding some labels to those radio buttons using the for attribute of the label tag in HTML. And then whenever one of these radio buttons is checked, we can style the label associated with that specific input separately. Don't worry if it's a little confusing. We go on and you will find it very easy to do. So let's just create some input. The type must be radio, of course. Also, we want to give all of them the same name, so all of them will be grouped together. So when one of them is checked, the other ones will be unchecked and won't be creating any conflict. So let's call it just button, and let's give it a class and something like input. Class and name will be the same for all of them, but IDs must be unique, so we can recognize them separately. I just copy and paste it a couple of more times, and each of these inputs will deliver the content for one single slide. I want this carousel to have 5 slides, 5 boxes for the content, so I just create 5 inputs. And now I'm ready to create labels. Now I save it and I see the radio buttons here, and since the name in all of them is button, as you see, when one of them is checked, the other ones will be unchecked, and this is necessary for our later styling. Now it's time to create 2 groups of labels. Let's create 2 parent tags. I call one of them items and one of them nav. The labels that we put inside the nav will play the role of navigation buttons, and the labels that we create inside the items tag will be delivering the data associated with this inputs. Let's create a label, and labels take a for attribute, and here is where we can connect a label to an input, just like this. We gave ID to each of these inputs, and now in the for attribute as a value, we just pass the ID of that specific radio button. Now, whenever this input is checked, we can style this label or unchecked, doesn't matter. In any case, this label is connected to this input due to this ID and for attributes. Now let's give it some sample data. And now I want to give it another attribute that is a class, and give it an item, for example, class item. And now let's copy and paste it 4 more times for the other inputs. So here we have 5 inputs and 5 labels associated with this inputs. As said, these are the items, the cards that deliver the information associated with a single slide, single radio button. Now we want to copy and paste the labels over here, and in this case we need to change the classes to dot instead of item, and we don't need any information inside it. And this is the whole template that we need to create this carousel in case of HTML. The rest of the work will be on the CSS side. So we created a container and then a wrapper for component. Also, we created a class called carousel. We created 5 inputs and 2 parent tags. One of them is called items, and one of them class nav, and inside each of these parents we have 5 labels that each label is associated and connected with one of these. For example, this input has this label and this label connected to it. The next one, input 2. The next one, input 3. And this is the whole template that we need in case of HTML. Let's go to the CSS part and style the rest of it. First, I need to add a box sizing border box since we've added 2 pixels border, and also we need to give it 100% width. The next thing is hiding the radio buttons. The class was input, so I type input.input display none to hide the radio buttons. Now let's style items. The position will be relative. Display flex, because we need to create a flex box for all of these cards. Also, we need to justify the content to center and also align items to center. The width will be 33 view width, and also aspect ratio will be 16:9, and margin, amazing, it does whatever it wants. So auto and perspective, 1000 pixels perspective, and this is the frame. Now time to style the items, the cart labels that we need to style to deliver the content. First of all, the position will be absolute, top 0. We want to start it at the top of the wrapper. Also the width, let's give it a width almost 300 pixels, and aspect ratio again will be 16:9, and maybe some padding, 20 pixels. And since we have added a padding and border, we need to give it a box sizing border box. So box sizing border box. Also, we need to add a border radius equal to maybe 10 pixels, and a background, maybe this one is good, and color, light gray. Also, we need to add a box shadow, and set it to 0 for X, 0 for Y, 30 pixels for blur, and black for the color. Also, we want the cursor to be pointer when the mouse is hover over it, like this. Also, let's give it a max width to make sure it doesn't exceed the proper area. Also, let's make the text centered. Also, we want to prevent users from selecting the content inside the cart, so we give it a user select none, and also overflow hidden. And the last one will be transition, that we want to set it on transform, and maybe 700 milliseconds. And I think this is enough for now. the next tag will be the nav parent tag. So nav, it's not a big one, just display flex, and we need to justify content to center, so we make sure that the navigation buttons are all centered. Now it's time to style the dot class that is given to this navigation buttons over here. We need to give it a width, maybe something like 13 pixels, height the same, and also border radius 50%, so it will be rounded, and a background dark gray, almost dark gray, and also the cursor we want it to be pointer. And now we have the navigation buttons over here. Let's give it some margin to make some distance between them, and maybe 10 pixels is fine. Yes. Now we have all the navigation buttons and also the cards, but you see one of them because the position is absolute and they're overlapping each other. But when we're done with the styling, you will see all of them in a very nice positioning. Now the next one is creating the functionality for this click and this switch between the checked input and change the labels and change the appearance of navigation buttons. But before that, let's create two animations, two very simple CSS animations, because we will need that in the next step. The first one is supposed to make the object blurred, and the other one will be reversing that. So type @keyframes, and let's call the first one blur, and the animation is just two-part and is from filter blur 0, it goes to filter blur 5 pixels. When this one is applied, the item will be filtered by a blur filter for 5 pixel, and the next one is just reversed, just like this. Now we have these two animations, and we can call these names to apply the animation to any item that we want. Now let's go to the next step, that is the main and last part of the tutorial. As mentioned previously, the idea is using the checked pseudo class of CSS, and depending on the item that is checked, we style the labels that is connected to that specific input using the for attribute. The way that we do it, for example, if we want to do it for this input that has this ID, I copy it, and here I type a pound, a hash, and then the ID name, and then a colon, and checked pseudo class. Now whenever this item, this input with this ID is checked, this one will be triggered. Now I want to type a tilde. This special character will look for all the tags at the same level. For example, I'm mentioning this with this ID, and what we have at the same level are all of these inputs, this items class and this nav class. Please note that, for example, this carousel is 1 level higher. This component is 2 levels higher. These are not at the same level of this. Also, the labels are all in the lower level. These children of items tag and these children of nav tag are not at the same level, but nav, items, and all of the inputs are at the same level. So the tilde, this special character, makes CSS look for all the items at the same level and find the items that we are looking for. We are looking for an item with class nav, so it will look for all items at the same level and finds this one that has the class that we mentioned here. Now we have access to this nav, and inside the nav we have labels, And one of these labels is the one that we are looking for. And the way we find it is using the attribute selector. The attribute selector we want to use is 4, and the value for that specific attribute is item 1. And this is the way that we can access this label when this item is checked. So whenever this input with this ID is checked, it looks for this one and finds the labels and pick the one that has the attribute 4 set to item 1. This is basically the whole idea of styling the items based on the checked or unchecked attribute of input. So now that I have access to this one, this navigation button, using this selector, I can style it. Let's make the background lighter, for example, light gray, and use a transform to scale it to a little bigger. 1 is the default value of transform scale. I increased the size to 1.5, so it's bigger now. Also, since it's already active, we want to set the cursor to default, so the mouse, when it's over it, won't be pointer. The rest of them are still pointer, but this one, since it's active, the cursor will be default. This is the idea that we can access the labels and style them. And now that I'm done with the first one, I need to copy and paste it a couple more times to style the rest of them. So whenever the input 1 is checked, I want the associated navigation button to change their style, but the rest of them to be styled as default. So I change this 4 value, and now I have access to all of these rest of the labels. So I turn the background to default, and also the cursor to pointer. And I want to reverse the size to default as well, so I'm sure that whenever the item is inactive, the navigation point, the navigation button will be styled as default. And this is the way that I'm done with all of these navigation buttons. Now it's time to style the cards, the items based on the checked attribute. Checked value, actually. I use the same method to access the cards. This time, instead of nav that found this tag, I want to look for this one and find the labels inside the items, because I'm about to style the labels that are representing the data. So I change the nav to items, and now I have access to this specific card. The only style that I want to give it for now is adding an animation, and as you remember, we created an animation called blur in unblur. I want to use the unblur here, and I want it to take 1 second to complete, and I want it to play just once, and after the animation is done, it will stay at the end of the animation. So I put forward to do that. Now, whenever the item 1 is checked, the card associated with that will be affected by this unblur animation. I want to set a z-index as well and set it to 3, so it will stay at the top. As you see, now that I've set the z-index to higher, now the label 1 is active and the card is showing up. So I copy and paste it, and this one, let's remove this and set the animation to blur, and the selectors this time will be the rest of them. So now whenever the item 1 is checked, the label 1 will be unblur and the rest of them will be blurred. Now let's change the z index of each of them. The z index for 2 that is next to 1 will be 2, 1 less. Also 5 will stay just next to 1. This one will be 2 as well, but this and this will be 1. So label for item 3 and 4 will be z index 1, and z index of item 2 and 5 will be 2. This will make sense later on that we style the perspective and put all of the items next to each other. Now they are covering each other and it's not understandable very well. But when we're done with it, you will see it in action. The last part of this one is using a transform, and this time I want to use a translate 3D. I want to change the translate 3D to, for example, 250 pixels, 0, and minus 100 pixels. Also, I want to add a transform rotate and set it to maybe 20 degrees. And as you see, now it's showing up over here. Let's make it negative. And now it looks like just it's circling around the main active content. Now let's copy this and paste it for all of the other items. And this one will be just like this. Now the item 2 and item 5 that are just next to the item 1 will be a little rotated, and also the perspective is changed. For the other one, item 3 and also the item 4, we need to modify this to maybe twice, 2 times more than it. And also we need to change the z attribute to twice and modify the rotate y this way. And now if I make it negative, it must be just like what we want. Exactly. Now this one is item 2 after 1, this one 2, this one 3, and this one 4, and this one will be 5. Just like this. Now we have all the style for just item 1, and we need to copy and paste all of these styles for the rest of the slides, meaning we need to have all of this block of style for each item. If we have 5 slides, we need to copy and paste it 5 times. So I just add a comment here. And copy and paste it underneath as item 2. And the other thing that I need to do is changing all of these to item 2. I don't fast forward it, so you can concentrate on it so you can see what I'm doing. I turn it to 1 because I'm working on item 2, and the rest of items will be 1, 3, 4, 5. Here as well, I want to style the label for item 2, so this one will be 1. Here as well, item 1. And now if I change this one, as you see, it is working. But the thing that we need to consider is that this circle effect that we are creating. When the item 1 was active, the next item was item 2, and the next one was item 3, and the item 4 was over here, and this one was 5. So it just acts like a circle. Now we want to apply this to this part of the work. So we are styling item 2. So when item 2 is activated, the next item will be item 3. The next one, 4. The next one, 5. And the next one, again, 1. So this is circulating around, if that makes sense. So this way, we can have this beautiful effect. And now I just fast forward this part. Just note that I'm just about to copy and paste this one for item 3, 4, and 5 again. And after I'm done with that, I will get back. Okay, as you see, I copied and pasted and modified all of these blocks of codes for each of these items, and now we have a carousel that is fully functional. And as you see, both buttons and slides are working because both are labels that are connected to the same input. So it doesn't matter if I click on a navigation button or a slide. So we have a little bit more of tweaks, but as you see, we have a horizontal scroll over here, and also when a label that is presenting the data is active, it's still showing on cursor pointer. First of all, let's turn this to default. When an item is active, this is over here, and we need to add a cursor default to this. When item 1 is checked, the label 1 for content will have cursor default. I just paste for the rest real quick. And done. Now we don't have the cursor pointer on an active item. On the other ones it's active, but on the active one is default. Now the horizontal scroll that you're seeing is because of the size, because it exceeds the width of the window when it's less than full width. Now we don't have any horizontal scroll, but since our carousel is not responsive, we have horizontal scroll over here when it's less than a computer screen size. So it's time to wrap it up with making the carousel responsive and edit all of these errors. For now, if I go to mobile tab, I have this horizontal scroll, and also the items are very small due to sizing and aspect ratio. Let's fix this as the last step of the project. I add an overflow hidden, and now the horizontal scroll is gone, and the last step is working on this items. I remove this max width, and also I set a height equal to maybe 200 pixels to items tag. And as you see, it works just perfect. And let's remove the border around the component. We don't need it anymore, and also this border. And now the project is completed. Now in each size, we have it perfectly centered and fully responsive. And if I add a margin, zero auto, now the container is centered as well. Now we can put whatever we want inside this card. For now, we just have a simple text, but for example, if I add an image here, let's copy and paste something. First, let's create a directory called images and paste something here. I just pasted this one. Simple image. I created a directory called images just next to index and pasted this image here. And now let's give it the address, images, showcase, and I copy and paste this for all of these labels and see what happens. And now, as you see, the images are showing up. Let's do a little tweak here by, for example, removing the padding and setting the item image to width 100%. And as you see, the images are showing up just perfect. So far, we have everything in place. The item is working and also it's fully responsive. But when I load the page, none of these inputs is activated by default. To solve this, we need to go to HTML and here find the item at the middle, that is 3 in this case, since we have 5 and the item 3 is the middle item, and add a checked attribute to that. So whenever the page is loaded, the item 3 will be selected by default. And now I load it, and as you see, the item at the middle is activated. By reloading it, it does the same. This is the whole project. I put the download link of this project in the description of the video. You can download and experiment with it. It's free. Hope you like this video. Stay tuned for more programming, server, Linux, and security tutorials. And until the next one, I bid you farewell.